Hey everyone. Today we're going to dive into something I call the mark and the vacuum. This idea of a hidden war that's constantly being fought for the human conscience. We're going to look at two completely opposite ways people react when a culture starts to go sideways. Two responses that honestly could not be more different.
All right, let's get right into it. We're talking about two heart postures. On one hand, you've got the mourner. This is the person who looks around at the world and just feels this deep, soul-level grief. But on the other hand, you have the deceived, the person who doesn't just put up with the decay but actually gets a kick out of it. So how on earth does a heart end up in one of those two places? Let's figure it out.
So our story really kicks off with these two groups you find in the books of Ezekiel and 2 Thessalonians. And man, they are polar opposites. They represent the two far ends of a spiritual spectrum. And what defines them is how they react to the world around them.
Okay, so first up, we've got these marked mourners. And what's just wild about this is that God isn't looking for the loudest person in the room or the one making the biggest show of being righteous. Nope. He's looking for a hidden internal reaction, a sigh, a groan. These folks are literally identified and protected because of the private grief in their hearts. And then you've got the other extreme, the deceived. You really got to pay attention to the sequence here. This isn't random. It's not like they just get unlucky. It happens for one very specific reason. First, they refused to love the truth. The lie they end up believing is a direct consequence of the truth they first pushed away.
So you see, the real dividing line here is what's happening on the inside. It's not about the outward stuff, it's the heart's posture. One group's heart is breaking over sin. For them, truth is their identity, even when it hurts. For the other group, sin is a source of pleasure, and truth is just an annoying obstacle. The outcome? One group gets preserved, and the other, well, they get exactly what they were already choosing.
Okay, so how does this even happen? What are the mechanics behind the scenes that build two totally different kinds of hearts? Because it's not random. The text suggests it's all about calibration, about training.
Right, so what's the secret sauce here? What's the thing that separates a grieving heart from one that actually enjoys the chaos? Well, it looks like it boils down to these four key principles that pretty much act like an internal compass, pointing you one way or the other.
You know, what I find absolutely fascinating about this is how it presents this whole idea of spiritual sensitivity, not as some feeling you're born with, but as a skill you train. It's all about what you're tasting, what you're looking at, what you practice, and what you're using as your measuring stick. Let's dig into a couple of these.
Yeah, think about it like developing a palate for, say, really good coffee. The psalmist here has basically trained his spiritual taste buds to love the sweetness of God's truth. And because of that, anything else, any wrong path, just tastes bitter. It's like poison. That grief the mourner feels, it's a natural reaction to something that tastes fundamentally wrong.
But the other heart, it's the complete opposite. It's ignored that little sting of, hey, that's not right, so many times that the nerve endings of the conscience are just fried. They're dead. It's been seared as with a hot iron. It literally can't feel the difference anymore. What should cause pain now causes nothing, or even worse, pleasure.
Okay, so we've got the two extremes, right? The mourner and the deceived. But let's be honest, what about most people? What about the huge group of us who are probably somewhere in between?
You can almost picture any society like this chart. You've got a tiny group of these mourners way over on one side, and a tiny group of the really lawless folks on the other. But that giant hump in the middle, that's the undeclared majority, the people in the seemingly safe middle ground.
Now, the Bible has a pretty blunt and honestly a sobering word for this kind of spiritual ambiguity: lukewarm. It's this state of being neither one thing nor the other, not hot enough to heal, not cold enough to refresh. It's a state that's described as spiritually useless.
And this middle ground, it's not a strong, stable place to be. Scripture calls it being double-minded, or wavering between two opinions, or just going with the flow on that broad road where everyone else is. It's all about indecision and instability. And this verse right here just blows the whole idea of neutrality out of the water. The takeaway is pretty clear. In this spiritual fight, there is no Switzerland. Sitting on the fence is, in itself, taking a side. There's just no recognized middle ground in this war.
So if being neutral isn't really an option, what happens to that person in the middle? What happens to that undeclared heart? Well, it becomes dangerously vulnerable. It becomes a target.
So why is this middle ground so risky? The danger is wrapped up in this core spiritual principle.
Jesus tells this really powerful story that's a huge warning sign about a heart that's empty, even if it looks clean and tidy on the outside.
Okay, so he talks about a house, which is really a metaphor for a heart, that gets swept clean. Awesome, right? An evil influence is gone. But here's the catch. The house is just left empty. It's not filled back up with something good, with a love for the truth. And that emptiness creates a spiritual vacuum. And what does a vacuum always do? It pulls something in. In the story, what rushes in to fill that void is way, way worse.
And this is where it all clicks together. That strong delusion we talked about earlier, it's not just bad luck. It is the direct result, the consequence of refusing to love the truth. The delusion is what fills the vacuum that the refusal created. That undeclared empty heart, it's basically prime real estate for deception.
And all of this, of course, brings this whole ancient concept crashing into our world, right here, right now, in our own lives.
So here's the bottom line. When things get serious, under real spiritual pressure, that comfy bell curve we looked at, it collapses. It flattens out into a single hard line. That big undeclared middle ground just vanishes, and suddenly everyone finds themselves on one side or the other. Your silence, your ambiguity, it ends up being your vote.
Which leaves us with one last kind of tough question to ask ourselves. In a world that feels full of leaning walls and lying wonders, what's the real state of our own heart? Is it still sensitive enough to mourn, to feel that sigh and groan? Or has the comfortable silence of that middle ground slowly, quietly, become its own kind of choice? A choice made perhaps without ever having to say a single word?